Welcome to the 2-minute warning interview, where we're going to dive into what's next and, most importantly, what should be next in the global energy transition. My name is 𝗙𝗶𝗺. I'm the director of the Energy Transition Dialogues. I'm delighted to welcome 𝗙𝗹𝗶𝗺 today. He is the president of Total E&P UAE and Total Energy's country chair in the UAE as well. 𝗙𝗹, thank you very much for joining us. Just before we jumped on, we're saying what a busy time it is.
It is a unique moment to have that conversation, and thank you very much. A lot of things are taking place. COP26 has started. The energy industry is basically reinventing itself, as we do as Total Energies, with the new identity, the visual, the name that we have put forward back in end of May.
And we're going to talk about those new identities later on as well, because I think it really encapsulates the change that's happening now. We've got COP26, as you mentioned, the world's biggest climate-related gathering underway. We've got 𝗙𝗵𝗆 right around the corner, not to mention Expo 2020 going on in Dubai, which also feeds onto your desk, I imagine, into what you're looking at. So that there is certainly that moment in time that you just mentioned is a huge amount going on, and I'm very keen to see where we're going to be on the 1st of December once that's, apart from Expo, all wrapped up. So far, looking at COP, I know so much has gone on, so it's a tough question, but what are your thoughts so far?
It's well, it's just started. I've seen the pledge on reducing methane emissions that was made yesterday. Let's see going forward in what will happen in the coming days, but definitely everybody's observing. And when I say everybody, it's all stakeholders, the societies, governments, companies, whatever the sector is, and in particular, the energy sector is closely watching, monitoring, following up on the outcome of COP26, and then we'll see what would be the concrete implications, the new elements that will have to be embedded in the way forward.
Indeed, arguably the really hard work will start thereafter. Once COP is emptied and implementation and roadmaps need to be pinned down, that's when the real tricky side of things come into play. I mean, world leaders, as you just mentioned, agreed to cut methane emission levels by 30% by 2030. How do you think this is going to affect the oil and gas business? Is this more or less ambitious than you thought it might be?
We've been working on that for some time. It's not new as far as we're concerned. It's part of our own roadmap for getting to net zero by 2050 with society, and we have in particular some ambitious objectives by 2030. Cutting down our direct emissions by 40% in 2030 compared to 2015, and then reducing the carbon intensity scope 1, 2, and 3 by 20% in 2030 compared to 2019, and working on the methane emission reduction is already something to which the company has already committed to, part of different initiatives like 𝗙𝗵𝗆, not to mention others.
Indeed, and you mentioned scope 3 there as well, which again I'd like to touch on shortly, because that's in itself is a whole new challenge. Do you think that the methane emission levels by 30% by 2030, not just on a Total Energies basis but on an industry basis, do you think that that's in line with what the market expected? Because going into COP, very much some thought methane emissions are going to fall off the map. There's so many things to discuss. Yes, it's important, but there's so many other major topics that also need to be tackled. And I thought actually comparatively it's a low-hanging fruit, and it would be one of the first ones to be addressed, as we've seen. So
when we look to the case of methane emissions, as I said, our objectives is by 2025. I'm not even looking to 2030. Compared to 2020, is to reduce by 20% the absolute emissions.
Indeed, but for the industry as a whole, so not.
I'm coming to it. Yeah. I'm coming to it. So okay. It's we know how the impact of methane emissions. So for the industry of whole, yes, the good thing is that now it's a step further to across the industry to engage on that field in view of the contribution of methane leak and emissions to the overall, I would say emissions. So how that can happen, what we're doing ourselves is eliminate routine flaring. This is a commitment that we've already taken. It's increased frequency of leak detections. It's cutting edge technical measurement platform, because one thing that it may look simple, it may look how to say obvious, but to be able to reduce something, you need to measure it.
Of course,
you know exactly.
That's not as simple as it seems.
So it's the importance of developing cutting-edge measurement platforms, installing instruments, and as I said earlier, being an active member of 𝗙𝗶𝘀 when it comes to Total Energies and the signatory of the methane guiding principles. So we're very happy to see that that is taking traction and that the industry is embarking on that journey.
Digital tools are deemed critical for the oil and gas sector. Of course they are. And BCG studies show that the potential overall impact of applying AI to corporate sustainability accounts to 1.3 trillion to 2.6 trillion in value and cost by 2030. So these are very appealing numbers, especially considering the oil price, especially considering the environmental pressures on the industry, let alone the pandemic as well. How active or how proactive do you think industry is being in unlocking the potential of those digital tools? And do you think anything's going to happen at COP to help spur that development?
Well, I will not comment on what will happen at COP. We'll see what will happen at COP after COP. So
there's nothing on your wish list for COP that might affect.
I would rather talk about the topics in general.
Okay,
and then we'll see what happens at COP. It's an essential piece in the industry. It's been going on for some time now. It's not new. It's taking more and more importance. As far as we're concerned, for example, we have put in place a few years ago a digital factory that is at the service of the business of the company. And it's about what? It's about performance. It's about efficiency. It's about reducing costs. It's about continuing the business. It's about sustainability. I take one example in drilling, for example, when you have digital tools, AI to monitor your drilling operations. It's about not only performance, it's about safety. And you can. It's about looking to digital twins in industrial platforms. I'm not going to name all the initiatives that are ongoing, not only on our side, but more widely in the industry, whether investor or service companies. This is for, as I said, it's a tool to improve performance. And one of our objectives is to contain, reduce our costs, to be able to be resilient, to be able to weather, I would say, any economic downturn in prices, as we've seen it in 2015 and lately near 2020. So that's a way to continue basically providing energy to the market, but it's also an area where that you can build on when it comes, as you said, to methane detection with drones, robots, measurements, and then implementing the appropriate solutions to reduce. So it's an essential part to answer your question. The amounts you've mentioned about the BCG study are just astronomical, but it just gives an idea of the depth and the breadth of what's going on in the industry using the digital.
And yeah, to say the potential as well. You said just then about being able to weather economic downturns. And we know on a global basis, obviously not just industry specific, that last year was the worst economic squeeze in 100 years, according to the International monetary fund, nearly 100 years. So there's that pressure, there's the environmental agenda pressure now, which arguably offers a lot of potential for the oil and gas industry, but it also is a huge disruption, and there is a lot of strain there as well. There's talk of near-term peak oil, and then, as we've already mentioned, the pandemic and the huge impact that's had on the oil status quo. So that's a huge injection of instability in just 18 months. How would you describe the status quo of E&P for oil markets in the UAE right now?
Well, it's a very vast question.
Is sentiment good? Is it?
It is. I think when you look to what has happened last year, if we're not going to the 2015 events, last year was actually 3 crises took place. Started with the pandemic, which a major disruption to everybody. And yet the energy industry was able to, and here in the UAE in particular, were able to have to continue producing and continuing operations safely. The second crisis was the downturn, the collapse of oil prices. And then again, measures were made to be able to continue as well operating, and again learn the lessons, and never forget the volatility of prices. Last year prices went down below, I say $30. I'm not even talking about the negative prices in the US. And today prices are above what they were, I would say, a few weeks before the pandemic outbreak. It just that's another key factor for resilience and for driving costs down, to be able to contain that. And the third one is you've mentioned it as well, is the climate agenda, climate crisis that's a reality for everybody, and for us as well in the energy industry as a company as well. When we take all that, 2 things, one for company and then in the UAE, but I will start with the UAE. The UAE has been doing very well. It's quite impressive how they've managed the crisis, the multiple crises, when cost is, they are very careful. They know they are facing the same situation, and they have also embarked on the energy transition journey. The UAE were amongst the first to sign the Paris Climate Accord. They've released their second NDC later at the end of last year. ADNOC has its own targets for emission reduction by year 2030, and then 2 weeks more or less, the UAE announced their ambition to get to net zero by 2050, which is again setting the pace. It just tells that it's a collective effort by all stakeholders to get there, and we as a company, Total Energies, and we're fully embarked on that. We have our oil and gas business because we are looking to providing energy to the market, what the market requires, and we see the market requiring oil, requiring gas, and electricity and renewables. Hence the strong focus on renewables with an ambition to get to 100 gigawatt by year 2030. So producing energy, more energy, less emissions at the same time, with all the initiative to reduce them along 3 axes: avoid, reduce, and compensate with the CCUS, the NBS, and other technologies that you could use once you've done what you could to avoid
I think it's just frozen slightly there. And just in terms of that picture for 2022, we've seen 230 billion worth in US dollars in impairments and asset write-offs in 2020. We don't have the full numbers for this year yet. And we've touched already on the squeeze that's on the fossil fuel market, though our opinion is to start demonizing oil and gas is not very smart, considering that's what's powering our lights right now and powering our cars and so on. So it's certainly a market that in many ways needs to be very much protected, albeit changed. But do you expect to be a big trend for oil and gas companies in 2022? How do you expect that push for more JVs, for perhaps more sales of big tier 1 companies, tier 2 oil and gas companies selling off parts of their portfolio to smaller energy entities, that those parts aren't as green, and they try and shift their portfolio around? Do you see that happening a lot next year?
Well, hard to say. I think all depends on a number of factors: the overall economic environment, the oil prices, and then at the end of the day, it's also how each company, how all that fits within each company own strategy. When it comes to ourselves, our strategy, as was explained by our CEO end of September, it's to be a multi-energy company, i.e. oil with low-cost oil, low-emission oil, to build on, continue building on our positions in LNG and grow the gas and LNG portfolio, because gas, we see it as a vector for the energy transition. It's an important part for the energy transition. And then invest heavily, massively in continue investing in the renewables, whether solar or wind, mainly offshore wind, and that is what driving our strategy. And then each company will have its own. So whether large or small, so I cannot comment on others how or what they would do. What I know is that we have a clear roadmap to move ahead.
And looking at hydrogen, you just mentioned the greener markets there as well. The IEA expects installed electrolysis capacity for producing cleaner hydrogen to reach 130 gigawatts by 2030. What role are you planning to play in this space in 2022?
Well, hydrogen is part of our objectives. As I said, a multi-energy company. So it's when it's gas, it's oil, it's gas, it's electricity, it's hydrogen, biomass, solar, and wind. And hydrogen, one could say that hydrogen is maybe what LNG was 40 or 50 years ago today. A lot of initiatives are taking place. It could be green, it could be blue. Obviously, we're working on that vector. It requires a lot of investments, a lot of technology to bring down costs, because today, be it blue or green, it's more expensive than what is already produced for industrial use, in particular in refineries, the gray hydrogen. So it's a collective effort also to bring down costs and to open up markets to compare to what it is today. It's a long journey, and but it's in embarking on it today that it could happen tomorrow.
Indeed, and the UAE has been very proactive in this space as
And
well.
the UAE has been very active with the Abu Dhabi Hydrogen Alliance, with some initiatives that are taking place, as other actors like ourselves are doing, for example, in Europe. So it's and again, at the end of the day, it's a collective effort, and not one alone will be able to get there at the end of the road.
Indeed. So if we were to look at the UAE as it stands now, keywords coming out seem to be resilience, seem to be innovation when it comes to the oil and gas market, and then also, as you use your phrase, very much setting the pace for the region. Of course, the net zero pledge by 2050 is the first such one in the MENA region, and includes a whopping 163 billion worth of investment in renewable energy, which is not a small sum by any measure. And then when it comes to COP, it's very much a wait and see situation, and when all the ink is dried and all the agreements, and then we'll see what comes next. That about summarizes up.
Yeah, and then you could add the UAE is also proposing to host COP28. I think it's 2023. So yes, they are setting the pace, and they are, and we see it in our, I would say, exchanges with the key actors here, be it ministry, ADNOC, 𝗚𝗶𝗺. It's they are serious. Initiatives are gaining importance, and these are topics that in discussion. I can just mention one, for example. A year ago, November 2020, we entered into a strategic partnership framework agreement with ADNOC to reduce emissions on CCUS. So it's a reality. It's and it's again that the journey, the energy transition, I would say the energy transformation, maybe it's a journey, and it's about partnership between all players, in particular energy and the large oil and gas and energy companies.
So the UAE being very serious in its transition, it's an energy evolution, really.
Yep, and we can see that here in the UAE. I can see that here in the UAE.
On the ground.
On
Excellent.
the ground.
𝗙𝗹𝗶, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure post-COP there'll be a whole new set of conversations for us to have. So we hope that you can join us again soon. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye for now.
Bye.